I am excited to have Samantha Beaty here with us today, the state veterinarian. Before I contacted her office, I did not even know we had a state veterinarian. How many of y'all knew that we had a state veterinarian in the state? 2 people out of 40 business people here. So the excitement today is to find why we have that and what they do. I'll tell you a few things about Samantha. She actually got interested in animals in high school, started doing veterinary medicine by volunteering in her hometown of Jamestown, Tennessee. She went to vet school and since then has worked in large and mixed animal practice for several years before she went into small animal practice. She graduated from Tennessee Tech, went on to the UT College of Veterinary Medicine, and before joining the Tennessee Department of Agriculture, she was an associate veterinarian at Premier Vet Center just down the road in Smyrna. In 2016, she joined the Tennessee Department of Agriculture and since now is in charge of that department. So please welcome Dr. Samantha Beaty.
Well, thank you very much for having me today. I can already tell by looking that the font is going to be messed up on this PowerPoint, so I'll do my best to get you through it. But yeah, people ask me a lot, what do you do? And it is a very unique position, I will have to say, a very unique way to use my degree. And also, I get to be a servant, even though people see me and they think government, that's not necessarily what I do all of the time. So what do I do? This isn't my house. These are my cows that I play with, but this is not what I do on my day-to-day job. So I obviously have some spoiled cows. We actually, as I say, I herd cats a lot. And so our primary mission is to protect the health and the quality and marketability of Tennessee's animals and animal products. And so how do we do that? And that is through prevention and control of animal diseases and emergency preparedness. There you go. So some of the responsibilities we have are regulatory responsibilities. So animal disease traceability, surveillance, and I'll hit on a little bit of each of those. You have probably been in contact with one of these programs and you may not have known it. Regulatory responsibilities. So my office houses the rules for everything moving in and out of the state. So the reason we want to know what's moving is so that we can know where diseases are moving. How many of you noticed that the price of eggs skyrocketed last year? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that's my gig. And I'll tell you a little bit about how I was involved in all of that. I didn't make them go up. I did try to manage it. But what we do is we want to limit the spread of diseases locally, regionally, nationally, and internationally. And we want to protect local livestock and producers from economic impact of disease. So Tennessee's a very unique state from an animal agriculture perspective. For a long time, we were the only state that had what are called 2 primary breeders. And so when you think about people who produce lots of poultry, we don't come to mind because we don't have a lot of broiler birds. We don't have a lot of egg layers. What we have is all the genetics. And at one point in time, we had about 70 to 80% of the genetics for the world. So while we have chickens, our chickens are really expensive chickens, and they go through some pretty rigorous genetic testing. So nothing modified, but they do x-rays of their joints and fluoroscopy of their joints, and they measure the thickness of their breast, and then they pick the best of the best, and those birds never leave the farm, right? And they produce those eggs, and those eggs are the second best eggs are left there to ship out to their grandparent flocks. So it's a pretty dynamic system, but we also have a lot of beef cattle. We're second east of the Mississippi in the number of beef cattle, and we're number 1 east of the Mississippi in sheep and goats. So, and what we ship out. So animal disease traceability, that's just knowing where anything is in a supply chain, right? So me tagging my cow on the farm, I should be able to know when she ends up at her terminal destination, if that's what happens, where she came from. And we struggle with that, but it's really important because we're only one of 2 developed countries in the world that don't have a very good system for this. And so we hustle when it comes time to trace disease. So anybody hear about us having BSE this year, the bovine spongiform encephalopathy? So we're the only state that had it. We detected it. It was detected at a slaughter facility. And so when that happened, it all came back to us. And we had to find that animal, and it was atypical BSE. So let me tell you what that means. That means that you can't get it from eating that animal. But out of an abundance of caution, USDA wants us to get that out of the food chain, because immediately what happens is our international market shut down. So when that happened, we had to go find this cow, and young cows don't get this, old cows get this. So she was like 9, and she'd been through several sales. And so we had to figure out where she came from. We ended up narrowing it down to 9 different herds, and we put them all under quarantine. And then we started eliminating them one at a time. And so we're talking about people's incomes, their livelihood. And so it's very challenging because you're trying to do the greater good, but you're also impacting producers on a personal level. So yeah, if we had a better traceability system, we would be able to address foot and mouth disease, which is one of our scariest scenario diseases, a little quicker. And I will say disease surveillance is the next thing that we do a lot of. So we do a lot of poultry testing. We do a lot of samples that come into the lab. And I did clean this one up from the last time because I didn't realize how many icky pictures I had on here. The last luncheon that I did, and I remember, veterinarians think differently. So I have to, like, I get excited at icky pictures. I can eat my lunch with icky pictures, but the rest of you probably don't want to. So we oversee the National Poultry Improvement Plan and also the U.S. SHIP program, which are all industry-run regulatory bodies. And so they actually make their own rules, and they're a lot harder than mine would be probably for them. But we do right now, so breaking news, you won't see this on a press release, but the reason that I'm dressed up as a late middle-aged woman who's exhausted today is because we had a detection of high-path AI yesterday in a backyard flock. And what does that mean? So that means that last night I spent a lot of time on the phone talking to a lot of our different industries about what kind of international impact this was going to have, because it would impact the decision that I made in regards to the outcome of how we manage that flock. So US has a stamping out policy when it comes to foreign animal diseases. And so typically we go in and we depopulate everything, and then we sanitize it and we make it lay fallow. As we've gotten into such a big outbreak last year where we had so many millions of birds involved, if it's a backyard flock that is non-poultry, meaning they don't put anything into commerce, we do have some options, unless, as a primary breeder state who supplies most of the world with its genetics, some country gets in a snit and they're like, no, we're not going to take your eggs, right? And that has happened. It happened in when Ukraine and Russia first got engaged in conflict, because Nicaragua was looking for a reason not to take U.S. products. So they cut our poultry shipments off, and we actually do ship a lot of eggs out of Tennessee to Nicaragua. So you're like, wow, I didn't know. I didn't either. I'll be honest, when I took the job, I've learned a lot. But these are the diseases that we're most concerned about. And the ones that we're scared about right now, and this is a picture of a cow's nose before you get too scared of that. So we're scared of African swine fever. African swine fever is a disease that is 100% fatal. And it is sitting in the Dominican Republic and Haiti right now, and there's zero probability that it will be eradicated from that country. It has not been in the Western Hemisphere for over half a century until right as COVID hit. We were gearing up to have an incursion. And why is it so important? And some of this stuff, I'll gloss over, but I'll go back to that in a second. Maybe I don't have it. Okay. So there it is. So ASF in China in 2018. Why is it important that we do disease surveillance, why we prepare to address diseases in the US? It's because of this nightmare scenario here that we learned about from China. So in 2018, there were 433 million head of pork produced in China. Okay, by contrast, 73 million here. So think about that. That's a huge difference. I can't even conceptualize how many animals that is in a space. So at the time, I was actually working or I was training for USDA or with USDA, and we were talking to a veterinarian who was in China who worked for a Cargill, the feed company. Cargill's massive, right? They provide feed for everybody in the United States. They're providing feed in China. Cargill's no longer in China. They lost more animals that year than we produced. They were talking about a country that, well, historically, they were just a pork consuming country. That's their primary source of protein. Everybody had a pig in the backyard. If you don't have a pig, you buy a pig from the guy who goes and picks up the pig in the morning at the market. So they did not import any beef in 2018 at all, none. Now they are the world's third largest importer of beef. They cannot successfully raise enough pork to go back to feeding that diet. So it's a whole continent, right? This disease has affected. And so part of what I do is we do surveillance and we do emergency preparedness. So we plan on how we're going to manage this disease if it comes into the US. And so we do a lot of work with different people. I'll go back. So emergency and disaster response, not just diseases, but we also, we will respond in natural disasters if needed. So we have disaster animal response teams in each county, or we try to have those. Those are locally supported by emergency management. And we're just asking for people who have experience with animals to come out and be able to respond in the event of an emergency. So one of the things that we have seen in the past, we do an awful lot of tractor trailer accidents, as you can imagine. We have so many interstates that come through Tennessee, and that's always a very exciting time. I spend a lot of time on the phone navigating that. We have a lot of, we want to try to prevent injuries. We do a lot of pre-preparedness planning for animal disease outbreaks, how we're going to stop it, that sort of thing. So believe it or not, and I don't like to, I have the authority. The state veterinarian's office has the authority to stop all movement of animals for an indefinite period of time. It's not something we would ever abuse. We want commerce to be rolling. That's our goal, is to operate at the speed of commerce. But it's a very unique position. I have about 15 people in the field. They all have assigned counties. They do things like meet with emergency management. They do animal testing, they place quarantines, they issue warnings. But this is the Gatlinburg fires. That was the staging area, but we had a DART team, and that's one of my field staff there. They actually set up the Red Cross shelter and helped, because people will not leave their animals in an emergency. They just won't do it. And so they had an animal friendly shelter available to those people, which was an amazing opportunity in a way that we could serve. And I'm very proud of that response. This is Bradley Parkway at 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, of course, right there around Opry Mills. And this was a tractor trailer load of cattle, and they dispersed, and we sent people out. We have portable chutes and all kinds of good stuff to catch them. It is still always a show that never ever goes smoothly. I can say people are angry, cows are stressed, I am stressed, but no, we do manage quite a few of these, so my staff are very good at that. Livestock welfare, this is about 30% of what we do. We took this over in 2016 when I started. It's why I came on with the department. And we house the complaint system for abuse cases. So if you see a cow or a horse or a goat, any food or fiber animal, that complaint would typically wind up with us, and then we would send someone out with law enforcement or our ag crime unit to investigate those. And our real goal is regulation through education, right? Because people, as you may have noticed, there's a trend for people to move to Tennessee because it's a very desirable place to be. And they get here and they're like, I'm going to farm. And so they immediately feel like they need a pig and a pony. And which, quite honestly, those are probably two of the least profitable animals in that individual type situation, but they'll get them and they don't know what they're getting into, right? Like horses have to have their teeth floated. I mean, they have to have their feet trimmed. They need very regular care. And so what we find is people just don't know what they're doing. Now, do we really see neglect? Yes, we do. Tomorrow, I will be spending all day in a jury trial in Cumberland County. So we do see cases where things are icky, and we do try to hold people reasonably accountable. If we get to a situation and it's really bad, it's obviously probable cause. We have the ability to determine that, which is pretty unique. Usually only a judge can give you probable cause, but my staff and I have the authority under Tennessee Code Annotated to determine probable cause, but then we have to go help the law enforcement agency prove that. But here's some success stories, right? Like you can tell, it doesn't take a veterinarian to see this horse is pretty skinny, like all his bones are sticking out. And 2 months later, all he had was some food and some veterinary care. And wow, I mean, what an amazing difference. And we don't prosecute a lot of cases because, again, education through regulation. But we want animals. There's so many animals in Tennessee, and we want people to learn to do better if they can, because there's nowhere to take them, right? One Health initiative, we work with the Department of Health. We work with Homeland Security. The FBI was at our office yesterday because someone left a closed bag on our dock. So we have all kinds of interesting collaborations, but one of the things we do, I don't know, salmonella in people is pretty common, petting zoo issues. So we'll work with the health department to test animals to try to locate the source of that. So basically our primary jobs are livestock welfare. So I tell everybody that's my number one, like year-round kind of gig, but I'm always like my number one is emergency preparedness. That's what I do when there's not an emergency, is getting ready for an emergency. So we operate off the incident command system, just like TEMA, and we do engage those folks. We have an emergency for resources and logistics and that sort of thing. And we do, last year, I will tell you that Tennessee depopulated almost 500,000 birds. We had 9 affected premises. It was hard. I will tell you that we're all still living with some of the emotional burden that came with that. Because the situation we had yesterday, we had to make a decision about this person's flock, and it is their primary source of protein. And it's, one of those deals where trade versus individual. And so we figured out we're not going to have a big trade impact on this flock yesterday. So this lady, she's pretty isolated. She's somewhat of a recluse. She doesn't leave her property. We're going to be sending somebody in to check on her every couple of weeks to make sure she still has her birds, because if she doesn't, she can't eat. But we also want to make sure those birds don't leave. And so that is why there's a chance that some of her birds will survive and she can still consume that product as long as it's cooked well. So she also has them all named. And so you get into an emotional attachment, a pet situation. It becomes very challenging to try to decide what's the most important thing. So we're dealing with high pathology influenza. It's not going away. This is the most recent numbers that we have from the last 30 days. This is totals for 22-23. But Tennessee hasn't made it to the map yet. Us, Arkansas, and Alabama have all had recent detections. This is the most recent map. You can go on USDA's website and it will give you a live update. But the reason that we had such an increase in eggs last year is because all of the layer birds that are kind of in the upper east, Midwest, those birds were heavily impacted to the number of millions and millions of birds. And so when it happened, we did not have a stable supply of, you're gonna be like, what? Powdered eggs. So when this happened before in 2015, we did not see a shift in the prices of eggs, and we did not see that passed on to the consumer because the U.S. had a giant stockpile of powdered egg. We did not have that this time. And so as we saw the demand for eggs continue and we saw the numbers of layers going down, obviously eggs became a scarce commodity. So almost enough to make me want chickens, but not really. So African swine fever, that's the one we talked about that's so scary, that's kind of sitting down there in the Caribbean. We're a little bit worried about it. I think if you map it, it's 693 miles from Miami. I do think that the U.S. is in a decent position to manage it, right? We're going to probably handle it more like Europe is handling it and less like our Asian friends. because I'd say we'll see like point source introductions. We'll be able to isolate it to a couple of farms and manage the issue there hopefully without having it get into our wild population, because that's what would be scary. And as many of you probably know, Tennessee has a fair number of wild hogs. So the other thing, if you just look at, this is in 2020, 5 of the top 11 most valuable agricultural products are animal products. So meat, milk, and cheese. And globally, pig meat is the most produced type of meat. So, and caloric and fertilizer diplomacy in this order. So this is from, I watched a gentleman who gave a fascinating spiel about this. I left depressed. But what I did find out was the U.S. is in pretty good shape, right? We're a food provider. We are not, as a country, we are not food insecure. And we also have a relatively good supply of resources like fertilizers. Other countries where, and this is especially true when Ukraine became involved because they're the breadbasket of the world, right? When their, ability to produce grains dropped, the demand for our production went up. It impacts everybody because it means animal feed goes up. I mean, there's a whole scenario where things become a little more challenging for everybody. But as a whole, the U.S. is in a good place. So this is me. In 2013, I went to Botswana and did some work for a rescue there. They rely very heavily on the tourism trade to promote their area. Everybody's employed by tourism, planes, fuel. And so we were in a very remote little town called Maun that the only way in is bush plane. But these are the families that are there, and there's just a whole generational gap there. What they do, though, is they have pets that they love a lot. And some of them are more than pets. Some of them are like working farm dogs. And they carry diseases that impact the lions and the wild dogs and that sort of thing. And so the idea is to try to protect them, to protect industry, to protect everybody. And this was just a lovely family who they raised watermelons, and they gave us a lot of watermelon, and we were there visiting with them and their dogs. But it was an amazing experience. I did work on a few donkeys while I was there. Just a really unique place, and just one of the loveliest groups of people in the whole world. So friendly. But I've had a lot of great experiences as a veterinarian, and I don't know if I really covered everything that I did today, but I'm open for questions if you have any. I really appreciate you letting me be here. I will say, this is Plum Island. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Plum Island. There's a book about Plum Island. There's all kinds of like scary, like I would say conspiracy things about Plum Island. Plum Island is run by Ag Research, USDA, and the Department of Homeland Security. And it is where they keep all the icky diseases that could impact agriculture. So that is where foreign animal disease diagnosticians, which I'm one, are trained, and there are 7 others in the state. And we all have what I call the serial killer kit that we keep in the back of our vehicle. And I don't have mine today, but if we have boxes with hacksaws and hammers, and there's a lot that goes into that. But it's the idea is that we take everything on a property and we leave it until we know what we've got. We don't want to move animals in a dangerous situation, but this island is being phased out, and I'm a little bit sad. But there are some really great books, fictional books too, about it. But if you've heard of the Montauk Monster, they think it washed up from Plum Island. I can tell you it didn't. But what they are doing there is they are giving veterinarians like myself a real-time experience in seeing some of these diseases and what their impact is, so that we can address them if we see them in the United States. And so we can recognize them if they come on our soil. They're going to move this to Manhattan, Kansas. I was just there last week. It's an amazing facility. I do have some questions about putting this in the middle of Tornado Alley, but I was impressed with their structure. And so one really neat fact about it's called NBAF, the National Bio and Agri-Terrorist Foundation. So basically, they have a biosecurity level 4 lab, which is pretty awesome if you're a geek like me, where you have to hook up to air and go in. But the gentleman who runs the biosecurity level 4 lab is a University of Tennessee graduate. And I had no idea until last week. And I was so impressed with that, because I think we struggle to get veterinarians to be engaged in the world. I love private practice. Don't get me wrong. I still have lots of friends. I have, a fondness for small animals, large animals and everything, but you really don't know the impact that the people in these kind of positions have. There are 50 of us across the United States. We meet pretty regularly, and we formed some unique friendships, but we also have lived some pretty harrowing things together over the last couple of years. So, but I do appreciate your time, and I will take any questions that you have. Thanks for having me today.
My son was doing, he's an a wildlife and fish science major, but he was doing something with some group checking deer jaws, the jaws of deer a year or so ago. What was he doing?
He was probably actually collecting lymph nodes or CWD testing, because West Tennessee has chronic wasting disease. So yeah, they're testing that, and we run that in our lab for wildlife resources, so that we try to keep it out of the food supply. There's no evidence that people can get it, but at the same time, we don't know enough about it to say for sure. So yes, sir.
I have two questions, not at all related. Does Tennessee export a lot of ag products, and if so, what are our major markets?
I can only really talk about animal markets. If my husband were here, he could speak relatively intelligently about the other, because he's a big ag guy. But our major markets are, we have a lot of cow-calf operations, so we ship a lot of feeder-sized cattle out west, which if you send them a disease, it really endears you to those state veterinarians out there. But then also, again, poultry is our number one, like eggs, poultry products, day-old chicks. So we ship a lot of stuff internationally and also in the continental US.
Second question is, I've been reading about how the avian flu has been affecting sea mammals.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me how that happens?
So I'm not a pathologist. I love pathology, but I will tell you what I think happens. So if I were to cook a piece of meat from an infected bird and eat it, I will not get sick. I mean, we know that. However, sea mammals, bears, foxes, I mean, there's a whole list on that USDA website of mammals that have been impacted. They are scavenging usually on weaker or deceased animals. And so what they're doing is they're actually ingesting live virus and inhaling it, and they are becoming susceptible to it. Now, people can get avian influenza. We always make our workers wear, as I call it, the full ET. If y'all remember that movie, like respirators, Tyvek, the big boots, we make them wear that because we don't want to be that first person that it jumps to that creates another pandemic. But it's rare, and if you've heard about it in the news, it's usually been because someone got dead virus up their nose and they got swabbed, and we haven't been able to tell if they were infected or not. Yes, sir.
When a fruit with the backyard plot gives you eggs, how safe are they, and how should we?
Totally unrelated to high path. I think as long as you're clean about them, they're safe. I mean, certainly I've consumed a lot of eggs raised by my uncle and mom and everything like that. But I think as a general rule, you always want to be cognizant that they're not pasteurized, as most of your table eggs are at the store. So they're not being sanitized coming out of those laying facilities. And so there's always a higher risk of salmonella and other enteric bacteria. So. And.
Well, I was in Dry Valley for family service last week, and I stopped by my uncle's farm afterward and kind of got to talking to him. And in the power industry, we've got an expression that's we're just one farmer is passing away from a new development to pop up and need several more substations and everything else. And he made the point that once you develop that, you can't go back. You look at the United States, we're in a good position right now. Is anybody looking at that, our productive farmland and so forth, and where they're going through?
So actually, I can speak for Tennessee. I know that it's an issue, but for Tennessee, I know that the Commissioner of Agriculture, Charlie Hatcher, it's been one of the priorities of him and his executive team to look at farm usage and how farmland is being used. So as you can imagine, Tennessee is losing a lot of farmland every day, and we're trying to encourage people to keep that in farms, but at the same time respect that not everybody wants to be a farmer, right? So. But I think that the last statistic I saw was that we're losing 6 acres of farmland every hour in Tennessee, and that's a fairly shocking number.
I was wondering if we still have any problem in our poultry with Newcastle disease. My wife's Danny's brother developed a vaccine for Newcastle disease. And before that, the California Department of Agriculture killed every bird in 40,000 square miles. And the government of France burned out 2 complete farms just trying to get rid of Newcastle before he developed the vaccine. And the government of France gave him a medal for rescuing their poultry industry, but we never gave him anything.
Yeah, I would say, so one,
It's Henry Stone from Georgia.
yeah, okay, that's really cool. Georgia's a big poultry state, and they sell a lot of chicken paws and they do a lot of research, but Newcastle disease is still a threat, mostly because most of the birds that are in backyard flocks or in communities where people may work in commercial poultry are impacted, and so we don't see it as much. We usually see it in athletic chickens, right, that come in that are fighting, so.
One last question. We had dogs and we put them on electric fences,
Mhm.
the invisible fence. And when they were training them, they said, if the dog gets too close, they'll get a correction. I said, they'll get shot. And my question is, I have heard the word depopulate. Is that synonymous with exterminate and kill?
So depopulate, if you look at the AVMA guidelines for euthanasia, there is an approved list of mass depopulation methods, because when we're in an emergency, and our biggest block last year was 250,000 birds. If we euthanize every one of those, half of them would die of the disease before we got to them, right? So we're trying to prevent disease spread, but we're also trying to limit suffering. And so it's not the same as every bird being individually euthanized, but there are techniques that are considered humane depopulation for large numbers of animals.
So the answer was yes.
Exterminate's pretty hard, but yeah. So, all right, well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I hope that.
What was in the bag? You said someone left the bag and you have to
A deer. Someone backed up and dumped it on our dock on Sunday afternoon, and if we don't know what it is, then,
yeah.
yeah.
It was a dead deer.
My staff was like, it was body shape, it could have been a human. I was like, no, it's not. You can't make this stuff up. You really can't. It's a very interesting.
Oh my, I know, when Roy told me, I was like, she takes care of the police dogs and the horses that the sheriffs ride around on? No, you do way more than that. Okay, well, we don't have anything else. We are adjourned.